Essays in Idleness, the Tsure Tsuregusa of Kenko. What a strange, demented feeling it gives me when I realize I have spent whole days before this inkstone, with nothing better to do, jotting down at random whatever nonsensical thoughts have entered my head. Essay 1. It is enough, it would seem, to have been born into this world for a man to desire many things. The position of the emperor, of course, is far too exalted for our aspirations. Even the remote descendants of the imperial line are sacred, for they are not of the seed of man. Ordinary nobles of a rank that entitles them to retainers, let alone those who stand in the solitary grandeur of the chancellor, appear most impressive, and even their children and grandchildren, though their fortunes may decline, still possess a distinctive elegance. Persons of a lower rank, fortunate enough to achieve some success in keeping with their station, are apt to wear looks of self-satisfaction, and no doubt consider themselves most important, but actually they are quite insignificant. No one is less to be envied than a priest. Sei Shogunon wrote of priests that they seemed to outsiders like sticks of wood, an apt description. The clerics impress nobody, even when they flaunt their authority and their importance is loudly proclaimed. It is easy to see why the holy man Soga should have said that worldly fame is unseemly in priests, and that those who seek it violate the teachings of Buddha. A true hermit might, in fact, seem more admirable. It is desirable that a man's face and figure be of excelling beauty. I could sit forever with a man, provided that what he said did not grate on my ears, that he had charm, and that he did not talk very much. What an unpleasant experience it is when someone you have supposed to be quite distinguished reveals his true, inferior nature. A man's social position and looks are likely to be determined at birth, but why should not a man's mind go from wisdom to greater wisdom if it is so disposed? What a shame it is when men of excellent appearance and character prove hopelessly inept in social encounters with their inferiors in both position and appearance, solely because they are badly educated. A familiarity with orthodox scholarship, the ability to compose poetry and prose in Chinese, and knowledge of Japanese poetry and music are all desirable. And if a man can serve as a model to others in matters of precedent and court ceremony, he is truly impressive. The mark of an excellent man is that he writes easily in an acceptable hand, sings agreeably and in tune, and though appearing reluctant to accept when wine is pressed on him, he is not a teetotaler. 2. The man who forgets the wise principles of the reigns of the ancient emperors, who gives no thought to the grievances of the people or the harm done to the country, who strives for the utmost luxury in everything, imagining this is the sign of magnificence, who acts as if the world were too small for him, seems deplorably wanting in intelligence. You will find the Lord Kujo's testament, the instruction, "Make do with whatever you have. From your court costume down to your horses and carriages, do not strive for elegance." Again, you will find among the writings of the retired Emperor Juntoku on court ceremonial, quote, "The clothes worn by the emperor should be simple and unassuming." End quote. 3. A man may excel at everything else, but if he has no taste for love-making, one feels something terribly inadequate about him, as if he were a valuable wine cup without a bottom. What a charming figure is the lover, his clothes drenched with dew or frost, wandering about aimlessly, so fearful of his parents' reproaches or people's gossip that he has not a moment's peace of mind, frantically resorting to one unsuccessful stratagem after another, and for all that, most often sleeping alone, though never soundly. But it is best that a man not be given over completely to fleshly pleasures, and that women not consider him an easy conquest. 4. It is admirable when a man keeps his thoughts constantly on the future life, and is not remiss in his devotions to the way of the Buddha. 5. It is better for a man sunken in grief over misfortunes to shut his gate and live in seclusion so quietly, awaiting nothing, that people cannot tell whether he is at home, rather that he hastily decide to shave his head and become a priest. Akimoto, the middle counselor, once spoke of wishing, quote, to see the moon of exile, though guilty of no crime, end quote. It is easy to imagine why he felt so. Note: many Japanese commenters express bewilderment over Akimoto's wish. Presumably, he desired to enter into the emotions of famous poets who had seen the moon in exile. It is hard to believe he actually longed to be exiled. 6. Even members of the nobility, let alone persons of no consequence, would do well not to have children. Prince Kanikira Fujiwara no Korochimi and Minamoto no Harihito all desired that their line end with themselves. Fujiwara no Yofushusa, according to the account in Okagami, was of the same opinion. He wrote, "You would best not have descendants. How unfortunate it would be if they proved inferior to yourself." They that when Prince Shotoku had a tomb built for him before his death, he ordered the workmen to cut here, trim there. I wish for no descendants. 7. If men were never to fade away like the dews of Adashino, never to vanish like the smoke over Toribiyama, but lingered on forever in the world, how things would lose their power to move us. The most precious thing in life is its uncertainty. Consider living creatures. None lives so long as man. The mayfly waits not for the evening, the summer cicada knows neither spring nor autumn. What a wonderfully unhurried feeling it is to live even a single year in perfect serenity. If that is not enough for you, you might live 1,000 years and still feel it was but a single night's dream. We cannot live forever in this world. Why should we wait for ugliness to overtake us? The longer man lives, the more shame he endures. To die at the latest before one reaches 40 is the least unattractive. Once a man passes that age, he desires, with no sense of shame over his appearance, to mingle in the company of others. In his sunset years, he dotes on his grandchildren, and prays for long life so that he may see them prosper. His preoccupation with worldly desires grows even deeper, and he gradually loses all sensitivity to the beauty of things, a lamentable state of affairs. Note: the well-known expression mono no aware is here translated as the power of things to move us. It has also been translated as the pity of things, a more literal meaning. 8. Nothing leads a man astray so easily as sexual desire. What a foolish thing a man's heart is. Though we realize, for example, that fragrances are short-lived, and the scent burnt into clothes lingers but briefly, how our hearts always leap when we catch a whiff of an exquisite perfume. The holy man of Kume lost his magic powers after noticing the whiteness of the legs of a girl who was washing clothes. This was quite understandable, considering that the glowing plumpness of her arms, legs, and flesh owed nothing to artifice. Note: the holy man of Kume figures in tales dating back to the 10th century. His magic power was an ability to fly through the air. 9. Beautiful hair, of all things in a woman, is most likely to catch a man's eye. Her character and temperament may be guessed from the first words she utters, even if she is hidden behind a screen. When a woman somehow, perhaps unintentionally, has captured a man's heart, she is generally unable to sleep peacefully. She will not hesitate to subject herself to hardships, and she will even endure cheerfully what she would normally find intolerable, all because love means so much to her. The love of men and women is truly a deep-seated passion with distant roots. The senses give rise to many desires, but it should be possible to shun them all. Only one, infatuation, is impossible to control. Old or young, wise or foolish, in this respect all seem identical. That is why they say that even a great elephant can be fastened securely with a rope plaited from the strands of a woman's hair, or that a flute made from a sandal a woman has worn will infallibly summon the autumn deer. We must guard against this delusion of the senses, which is to be dreaded and avoided. 10. A house, I know, is but a temporary abode, but how delightful it is to find one that has harmonious proportions and a pleasant atmosphere. One feels somehow that even moonlight, when it shines in the quiet domicile of a person of taste, is more affecting than elsewhere. A house, though it may not be in the current fashion or elaborately decorated, will appeal to us by its unassuming beauty. A grove of trees with an indefinably ancient look, a garden where plants growing of their own accord have a special charm. A veranda and an open-work wooden fence of interesting construction, and a few personal effects left carelessly lying about, giving the place an air of having been lived in. A house which multitudes of workmen have polished with every care, where strange and rare Chinese and Japanese furnishings are displayed, and even the grasses and trees of the garden have been trained unnaturally, is ugly to look at and most depressing. How could anyone live in such a place for long? The most casual glance will suggest how likely such a house is to turn in a moment to smoke. A man's character, as a rule, may be known from the place where he lives. The Godukaji master stretched a rope across his roof to keep the kites from roosting. Saigyo, seeing the rope, asked, why should it bother him if kites perch there? That shows you what kind of man the prince is. I've heard that Saigyo never visited him again. I remembered this story not long ago when I noticed a rope stretched over the roof of the Kosaka Palace, where Prince Aikoji lives. Someone told me that, as a matter of fact, it distressed the prince to see how crows, clustering on the roof, would swoop down and seize frogs in the pond. The story impressed me. Made me wonder if Sanasada may not have also had some such reason. 11. About the 10th month, I had the occasion to visit a village beyond the place called Kurusuno. I made my way far down a moss-covered path until I reached a lonely-looking hut. Not a sound could be heard, except for the dripping of a water pipe buried in fallen leaves. Sprays of chrysanthemum and red maple leaves had been carelessly arranged in the holy water shelf. Evidently somebody was living there. Moved, I was thinking, one can live even in such a place. When I noticed the garden beyond a great tangerine tree, its branches bent with fruit that had been enclosed by a forbidding fence. Rather disillusioned, I thought now, if only the tree had not been there. 12. How delightful it would be to converse intimately with someone of the same mind, sharing with him the pleasures of uninhibited conversation on the amusing and foolish things of this world. But such friends are hard to find. If you must take care that your opinions do not differ in the least from those of the person with whom you're talking, he might just as well be alone. You might suppose that a man who listens in general agreement to what the other person is saying, but differs on minor points, who may contest an opinion saying, how can I possibly agree? Or argue, it's precisely because of this that is the case, would be a great comfort when you were bored, but as a matter of fact, if ever anything is said which might acquire a word of apology, of course, even when conversing with people who are not of the same mind, differences over the usual insignificant gossip do not matter. One realizes sadly what a great distance separates this man from the true friends of one's heart. 13. The pleasantest of all diversions is to sit alone under the lamp, a book spread out before you, and to make friends with people of a distant past you have never known. The books I would choose are the moving volumes of Wen Huasan, Wen Xuan, the collected works of Po Shui, the sayings of Lao Tzu, and the chapters of Shuangzi. Most works by scholars of this country those written long ago are often quite interesting. 14. There is a charm in the waka. The toil of the humblest peasant or woodcutter sounds delightful when described in a waka, and even the ferocious boar becomes gentle when the poets speak of the crouch of the sleeping boar. Poems of recent times occasionally seem to contain an aptly turned line or two, but I wonder why one never senses in them, as in the old poetry, overtones of going beyond the words. Tsurayuki's poem beginning, quote, although it is not twisted together of threads, end quote, has the reputation of being among the dregs of poetry in Kokinshu, but I doubt that any poet today could display such mastery of style. The poems of that age are characterized by similar form and diction. I cannot understand why this particular poem should have acquired such a bad reputation. It is quoted in the tale of Genshi, with the second line given as Monotowan Ashi ni. The poem in the Shiko Shinu ending, quote, even the pines that remain unaffected are lonely at the peak, end quote, has also been called a failure, and indeed, the form seems somewhat irregular. However, even this poem was adjudged to be quite superior when it was submitted to a poetry competition, and in later times it especially touched an emperor, as we know from Yanaga's diary. Some hold that the way of poetry alone remains unchanged since ancient times, but I wonder how true that is. The same words and subjects that might still be employed today meant something quite different when employed by the poets of ancient times. Their poems are simple and unaffected, and the lovely purity of the form creates a powerful impression. The language of the ballads in Ryoji Nisho also is often marked by intensity of feeling. Why is it that even the most careless utterance of the men of former days should sound so splendid? 15. It wakes you up to take a journey for a while, wherever it may be. As you walk around the place, looking here and there at rustic scenes and mountain villages, everything seems most unfamiliar. And how amusing it is the way people snatch the first opportunity to send a letter back to the capital. Quote, when you get the chance, don't forget to do this, don't forget to do that, end quote. In such a place, you really notice everything. Anything good, even the possessions you have brought along with you, seems better. And anyone you meet with artistic talent or handsome features seems more impressive than he usually would. It is delightful also to go into retreat at some temple or shrine, unknown to anyone. 16. Kagura is charming and full of interest. In general, I enjoy the sound of the flute and reed pipe when played as the accompaniment for kagura, but for everyday listening, I prefer the biwa and the wagon. 17. When you go into retreat at a mountain temple and serve the Buddha, you are never at a loss how to spend your time, and you feel as though the impurities of your heart are being cleansed away. 18. It is excellent for a man to be simple in his tastes, to avoid extravagance, to own no possessions, to entertain no craving for worldly success. It has been true since ancient days that wise men are rarely rich. In China, there was once a man called Su Yu who owned not a single possession. Someone, seeing him use his hands to scoop up water for drinking, presented him with what is known as a sounding gourd. For a time, Su Yu hung it on the branch of a tree, but it rattled when the wind blew. "How noisy," he said, and threw it away. Su Yu went back to drinking water scooped up in his hands. What a clean detachment must have been in his heart. Sun Shen slept without a quilt during the winter months. All he had was a bundle of straw that he slept on at night and put away in the morning. The Chinese considered these men so notable that they recorded their biographies for the sake of later generations. People in our country would not even think it worth mentioning them. 19. The changing of the seasons is deeply moving in its every manifestation. People seem to agree that autumn is the best season to appreciate the beauty of things. That may well be true, but the sights of spring are even more exhilarating. The cries of the birds gradually take on a peculiarly spring-like quality, and in the gentle sunlight, the bushes begin to sprout along the fences. Then, as spring deepens, mists spread over the landscape, and the cherry blossoms seem ready to open, only for steady rains and winds to cause them to scatter precipitously. The heart is subject to incessant pangs of emotion as the young leaves are growing out. Orange blossoms are famous for evoking memories, but the fragrance of plum blossoms above all makes us return to the past and remember nostalgically long-ago events. Nor can we overlook the clean loveliness of the Yamabuki or the uncertain beauty of wisteria and so many other compelling sights. Someone once remarked, "In summer, when the feast of anointing the Buddha and the Kamo festival came around, and the young leaves on the treetops grow thick and cool, our sensitivity to the touching beauty of the world and our longing for absent friends grows stronger." Indeed, this is so. When in the 5th month, the irises bloom and the rice seedlings are transplanted, can anyone remain untroubled by the drumming of the water trails? Then in the 6th month, you can see the whiteness of moonflowers glowing over wretched hovels, and the smoldering of mosquito incense is affecting too. The purification rites of the 6th month are also engrossing. The celebration of Tanabata is charming. Then, as the nights gradually become cold and the wild geese cry, the leaves of the hagi turn yellow, and men harvest and dry the first crop of rice. So many moving sights come together, in autumn especially, and how unforgettable is the morning after an equinoctial storm. As I go on, I realize that these sights have long since been enumerated in the tale of Genji and the Pillow Book, but I make no pretense of trying to avoid saying the same things again. If I fail to say what lies on my mind, it gives me the feeling of flatulence. I shall therefore give my brush free rein. Mine is a foolish diversion, but these pages are meant to be torn up, and no one is likely to see them. To return to the subject, winter decay is hardly less beautiful than autumn. Crimson leaves lie scattered on the grass beside the ponds, and how delightful it is on a morning when the frost is very white to see the vapor rise from the garden stream. At the end of the year, it is indescribably moving to see everyone hurrying about on errands. There is something forlorn about the waning winter moon, shining cold and clear in the sky, unwatched, because it is said to be depressing. The invocation of the Buddha names and the departure of the messengers with the imperial offerings are moving and inspiring. How impressive it is that so many palace ceremonials are performed besides all the preparations for the new year. It is striking that the worship of the 4 directions follows directly on the expulsion of the demons. On the last night of the year, when it is extremely dark, people light pine torches and go rushing about, pounding on the gates of strangers until well after midnight. I wonder what it signifies. After they have done with their exaggerated shouting and running so furiously that their feet hardly touch the ground, the noise at last fades away with the coming of the dawn, leaving a lonely feeling of regret over the departing old year. The custom of paying homage to the dead, in the belief that they return that night, has lately disappeared from the capital, but I was deeply moved to discover that it was still performed in the East. As the day thus breaks on the new year, the sky seems no different from what it was the day before, but one feels somehow changed and renewed. The main thoroughfares, decorated their full length with pine boughs, seem cheerful and festive, and this too is profoundly affecting. 20. A certain hermit once said, "There is one thing that even I, who have no worldly entanglements, would be sorry to give up. The beauty of the sky." I can understand why he should have felt that way. 21. Looking at the moon is always diverting, no matter what the circumstances. A certain man once said, "Surely nothing is so delightful as the moon." But another man rejoined, "The dew moves me even more." How amusing that they should have argued the point. What could fail to be affecting in its proper season? This is obviously true of the moon and cherry blossoms. The wind seems to have a special power to move men's hearts. Regardless of the season, however, a clear flowing stream breaking against rocks makes a splendid sight. I remember how touched I was when I read the Chinese poem, the Yuan and the Xiang, flowing over east, night and day alike. They never stop an instant to soothe the grieving man. Shikang also had the lines, "The heart rejoices to visit mountains and lakes and see the birds and fish." Nothing gives so much pleasure as to wander to some spot, far from the world, where the water and vegetation are unsullied. 22. In all things, I yearn for the past. Modern fashions seem to keep on growing more and more debased. I find that even among the splendid pieces of furniture built by our master cabinet makers, those in the old forms are the most pleasing. And as for writing letters, surviving scraps from the past reveal how superb the phrasing used to be. The ordinary spoken language has also steadily coarsened. People used to say, "Raise the carriage shafts," or "Trim the lamp wick," but today people say, "Raise it," or "Trim it," when they should say, "Let the men of the palace staff stand forth." They say, "Torches, let's have some light." Instead of calling the place where the lectures on the Sutra of the Golden Light are delivered before the Emperor the Hall of the Imperial Lecture, they shorten it to the Lecture Hall. A deplorable corruption, an old gentleman complained. 23. They speak of the degenerate final phase of the world, yet how splendid is the ancient atmosphere, uncontaminated by the world, that still prevails within the palace walls. The Dew Terrace, the morning collation, the this hall, the that gate, all have an impressive ring. Even objects that might equally be found in some humble place, such as half windows and blinds, a veranda of small boards, or a tall sliding door, sound quite splendid when the term is used of the palace. It is particularly impressive when the cry goes up in the antechamber, "Prepare for night." It is pleasing, too, that they should call for the lanterns in His Majesty's bedchamber. "Light the lamps quickly." The looks of smug competence on the face of even minor officials of the palace staff, to say nothing of the great nobles performing official functions in council, are amusing. I was particularly entertained, one extremely cold winter night, to see these functionaries dozing through the ceremonies at their stations here and there in the hall. The Tokujai Prime Minister once remarked that the dancers' bells in the Hall of the Sacred Mirror had a lovely, noble sound. 24. I believe that the most charming and touching sight is the shrine in the fields when an imperial princess is in residence. It is amusing how the people there avoid using Buddhist words like sutra or Buddha, and instead speak of colored paper or the one inside. Shinto shrines, as a rule, are too charming to pass without stopping. There is something peculiarly affecting about the atmosphere of their ancient groves, and how could the buildings surrounded by a vermilion fence with the scattered streamers tied to the sakakai boughs fail to impress? Especially splendid are Ise Kamo Kasuga, Hirano, Sumiyoshi Miwa, Kibune Yoshida, Oarano, Matsuno, and Umenomiya. 25. The world is as unstable as the pools and shallows of Asuka River. Times change and things disappear. Joy and sorrow come and go. A place that once thrived turned into an uninhabited moor. A house may remain unaltered, but its occupants will have changed. The peach and the damson trees in the garden say nothing. With whom is one to reminisce about the past? I feel this sense of impermanence even more sharply when I see the remains of a house which long ago, before I knew it, must have been imposing. Whenever I pass by the ruins of the Kyogoku Palace, the Hojioji, and similar buildings, it moves me to think that the aspiration of the builders still lingers on, though the edificers themselves have changed completely. When Fujiwara no Michinaga erected so magnificent a temple, bestowing many estates for its support. He supposed that his descendants would always assist the emperor and serve as pillars of the state. Could he have imagined that the temple would fall into such ruin, no matter what times lay ahead? The great gate and the golden hall were still standing until recent years, but the gate burned during the Showa era, and the golden hall soon afterwards fell over. It still lies there, and no attempt has been made to restore it. Only the Muryoju Hall remains as a memento of the temple's former glory. 9 images of Amida Buddha, each 16 feet tall, stand in a row, most awesomely. It is extremely moving to see, still plainly visible, the plaque inscribed by the major counselor Kozai, and the door inscription by Kanayuki. I understand that Hoke Hall, and perhaps other buildings, are still standing. I wonder how much longer they too will last. Some buildings that lack even such remains may survive merely as foundation stones, but no one knows for certain to what they once belonged. It is true that in all things it is a futile business attempting to plan for a future one will never know.